Hi, and welcome to the History Lessons in Edupedia World. This is the second lesson we have on some of the horrors that happened during the Spanish Civil War. We're taking only one example and putting it into context. This is the attack on Guernica. We're going to go specifically into the details of what happened that day. We saw in the previous lesson, if you haven't had a look, please go back. We got in context of what was happening in Spain at that moment. To do a quick review on it, let's remember that Spain was in the middle of a civil war that had started in July 1936. There was two sides. The nationalist side that had Francisco Franco at the head of it. They were the ones that made the military coup and wanted to overthrow the Republican democratically elected government at that time. As the situation in Europe was building up, when the war started, there was foreign intervention on both sides. Both sides had various countries help them openly or not as open. The nationalists had financial and military help from the most modern military trained countries at that time, the Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy with Mussolini. The Republicans, though, had great waves of international volunteers, but old and sometimes really few weapons from the Soviet Union. The only country that openly and was adamant to show the support was Mexico, that helped them financially and diplomatically. But now let's go into what happened in Guernica. What was the event? An aerial attack on a civilian town. We see here the map and where Guernica is situated, in the north, in the center of Spain. Where happened? Well, in the town of Guernica, in the Basque country in Spain, really close to France, if you have a look here. When did it happen? It was April 26, 1937, after a year at war. We remember that the uprising started in July 1936. Who carried out the attack? It was not the troops of General Franco. It was the German Airforce's Condor Legion, and helped by the Italian aviazione legionaria. It was foreigners that perpetrated this horrendous attack. And why? Well, yes, here there has been historical studies. There has been paperwork. This was a request from the Spanish national government, and the ties to these two countries during the Spanish Civil War. They requested it, and help was delivered. This help came in the shape of airplanes. Airplanes filled with bombs and machine guns. The code name for the operation they used was Operation Rouge. That consisted in an attack that lasted for 3 hours, carried out, as we said, by the German Air Force's Condor Legion and the Italian aviazione legionaria, requested by the Spanish national uprising. The bombing in Guernica had, as we said, 5 waves of airstrike by 45 aircrafts. The first wave was very well crafted. They threw 12 50-kilo bombs on the little town. The second wave, they selected the escape routes. They blew up the bridges to prevent people, civilians, from fleeing the city. Fighter pilots actually were given very, very specific instructions not to bomb the town itself on that second wave. They were trying and practicing out, taking out every possible escape route during that second go-through. Still, there were 36 additional 50-kilo bombs that were dropped on the city in 3 other waves. 5 waves for a city of 5,000 inhabitants. They went past over Guernica from north to south again and again and again. 3/4 of the buildings caused this devastation that we can see in the picture. Everything was destroyed. Amazingly, the only things left in the city after the attack were the Santa Maria Church and a 600-year-old tree, which was a sacred symbol to the Basque people, and the small munitions factory on the outskirts of town was still standing. That was not their objective. For us to picture what happened, we read at the top of the image here the records of one of the survivors. He said, "At 4, before the market closed, many aeroplanes came. They dropped bombs. Some came low and shot bullets into the streets. Father Ariotieghi was wonderful. He prayed with the people in the plaza while the bombs fell." Let's just picture this. All that people crouching around the square while the bombs are falling, and this priest trying to calm them down in a situation where you could do little. What made this attack so vicious was that it was a civilian target, that they treated the military way. Also, Monday was a market day, and the 26th of April was market day. In a normal situation, up to 10,000 people would go to the former Basque capital on market day. As war was getting close, they had stopped the main markets, but people still gathered on the same dates, especially when you could try and exchange food in a dire situation, how war is. Also, with all the fighting around, many had searched for refuge and traveled to Guernica. So you actually had people that had fled from other parts of the country and cities around and found themselves in this trap. we have to say that the bombardment on Guernica was on a really small town, and that makes that the same proportions of this attack in another city would have meant approximately 500,000 deaths in a city like Moscow or London, because of the sheer concentration of people in one same place. Here we're talking about 5,000 people that were scattered around the city and its outskirts. We do have to mention that the machine gunning was carried out by Hitler's pilots up to 4 kilometers around Guernica. This, at the end of the day, does suppose more of sadism than military necessity. This was a civilian town, and the only military objective was left unspared. It was left spared. It was there. You still had the munitions factory. In fact, during the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War, it is not until the bombardments of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that you would contemplate a percentage of destruction of buildings that great that could compare to the bombardment of Guernica. In such a small amount of time, the great destruction that came upon. Going to the words of Noel Monks, a correspondent for the London Daily Express. He said, quote, "I was the first correspondent to reach Guernica and was immediately pressed into service by some Basque soldiers collecting charred bodies that the flames had passed over. Some of the soldiers were sobbing like children. There were flames and smoke and grit, and the smell of burning human flesh was nauseating. Houses were collapsing into the inferno." This was the situation that they found themselves. This was the image of Guernica after the attack. A complete hell. As for numbers, the Basque government at that time counted 1,654 deaths. We have to mention that obviously there's an increase of deaths by interest of propaganda, but it's difficult to count the bodies, especially after that amount of destruction. We had all these buildings completely annihilated, torn down, nothing left. So many people were not recovered from all the rubble. So many people were burned by the incendiary bombs. Russian records of 37 say 800, but they admittedly didn't include injured that died afterwards, or the bodies that were recovered from the rubble. Modern estimates count the deaths at around between 150 and 400. Still, for a population that small and that scattered, it was horrific. Why is Guernica so relevant to history? This was one of the first raids carried out by an Air Force on a defenseless civilian population in modern times. First and Second World War, especially Second World War, changed the dynamics of military affairs. Here, civilian population is a target. Before, wars were fought between soldiers mainly. You did have collateral damage. Now, civilians are a target because they are part of the effort of war. This is what we called total war. And here, they were, as it's been called, doing dress rehearsals for the Second World War. We don't say this lightly. Hitler's support of Franco did have this Condor Legion at their orders. There was an adjunct of the Luftwaffe. The Condor Legion, though, provided the Luftwaffe with the opportunity to develop perfect tactics of aerial warfare that would later fuel Germany's Blitzkrieg through Europe during 1939 and 1940. With the information of an eyewitness, we keep this theory, we reinforce this theory. An eyewitness called Juan Juez said, "They kept just going back and forth, sometimes in a long line, sometimes in a close formation. It was as they were practicing new moves. They must have fired thousands of bullets." And we have confirmation of this. Keeping quotes from the people involved, Hermann, a German air chief, said, "The Spanish Civil War gave me an opportunity to put my young Airforce to test, and means for my men to gain experience." And just yet another one from Wolfram von Richthofen, commander of the Condor Legion. He said, quote, "Guernica, city with 5,000 residents, has been literally razed to the ground. Bomb craters can be seen in the streets. Simply wonderful." We see here that although Hitler was reluctant to massively help Spain, he helped Spain but had great interest in being there. He made the most, and this war before the Second Great War was a perfect testing ground, and Guernica suffered the consequences. Just to finish off, I want to mention that in a declaration adopted on April 24, 1999, the German Parliament did formally apologize to the citizens of Guernica for the role the Condor Legion, the German Condor Legion, played on bombing and destroying the town and its people. Later on, the German government even agreed to change some of the German military barracks named after the Condor Legion because of the shame of what it did during the war. That said, there has never been an apology to the city officially offered by anyone in the Spanish government. Even now, the Spanish government keeps a distance and no involvement with its history and what happened during the war. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Go for the third lesson following, where we'll talk about the actual painting of Guernica, if you're curious about it. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and see you in the next one.